At the time of this writing, I haven't hit 25k subscribers yet, but any day now, it looks like I'm gonna reach it. When that happens, I want to have a certain video put out, one I've been making in my head since this game came out. Five Nights at Freddy's Security Breach is the game that brought me back into the FNAF fandom, hell, back into indie horror as a whole, and for that, I owe it so much. But I think it's time I gave this game an honest look back, and talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. Security Breach by all means is not a bad game. Hell, I kinda think of the people who hate it so passionately are just looking for reasons to be upset. But I'm not blind to its many issues either. My perspective on Security Breach is that if you love it, then why let other people ruin the fun for you? Despite its imperfect art style, inconsistent fear factor, and shoddy attempt at furthering the lore, I still love this game and consider it one of my favorite FNAF games of all time. That said, it's objectively not as good as it could have been, and that's really the element of it that bothers me. If this game came out in the state it was meant to release in, then I doubt I'd have to defend it as hard as I do now. So let's take a peek into this game and figure out what works, what doesn't, and what I feel like could use some improvement, otherwise known as the good, the bad, and the ugly. The first thing that really sticks out to me as an enjoyable part of this game is in its character roster. I think objectively speaking, Security Breach's character roster is the strongest in any FNAF game so far. Or at least, it could be, but I'd prefer to talk more about why that is later. For now, let's look at each character in this game and talk about how they contribute to this game's seemingly endless amount of charm, starting with the humans. In the entire game, there are only 2 human characters. 2.5 might be closer, but for this I'll be counting Vanny and Vanessa as one person. Gregory is a mysterious child who crawls into Freddy's stomach hatch in order to hide away from Vanessa. He's a generally mysterious character and spends much of the game absolutely terrified. A little known fact about Gregory is that when you're in a hiding space, you can actually sometimes hear him whimpering anxiously. It's both adorable and sad, like a puppy in a dumpster. However, Gregory has a bit of an evil side, as we find out in a Tales from the Pizzaplex book that he's actually Patient 46, a child who led several therapists to their doom and was responsible for manipulating Vanessa. It seems at some point Gregory must have escaped Afton's control, because in Security Breach, Gregory is no longer the predator, but the prey. Until he starts kicking ass, but that's whatever. The problem is, none of that GGY stuff is really communicated well in Security Breach, leading to Gregory coming off as a bit of an anomaly. Then there's Vanessa, otherwise known as Vanny. Vanessa is the head of security and seems to want to help Gregory by making sure he leaves the Pizzaplex. On the flip side, Vanny is her alternate persona who wants to kill Gregory. There's not too much known about Vanny or Vanessa, other than one of the missions you can complete in this game is helping her break free from Glitchtrap's control. Let's move on to the animatronics. The thing about the main 4 animatronics is that aside from Glamrock Freddy, the others all have very basic and easy to describe personalities and traits. This makes them more identifiable and understandable at a bit of a cost to character depth. Let's start with Monty. Monty is a bit of a bruiser, with an aggressive side mixed with jealousy. As we can discover, he secretly wants to replace Freddy as the star of the show. He's easily described as the most vicious Glamrock animatronic, although also probably the one you'll see the least of. Glamrock Chica is a glutton, and is otherwise this ridiculously upbeat personality. To make up for the gluttonous half of her personality, Chica is also in charge of mazer size, which is like a combination of yoga and mazes, I guess. I'm not really sure of the benefits of an anatomically incorrect robot teaching humans how to do yoga, but whatever. Last is Roxy, and she's my absolute favorite. Her personality boils down to her sense of self. While she initially comes off as a narcissist similar to Monty, what she's actually like goes a bit deeper than that. When you first see her, she's talking herself up, talking about how much the audience loved her, and how she's the best. But as soon as you find her crying in her room, or later when you reach Roxy Raceway, it becomes more apparent what her real personality is like. This egotistical angle of hers is a massive front. She talks herself up because in reality, Roxy has no sense of self-worth. She tells others she's a winner, but deep down she feels like a loser. This desire to constantly reassure herself she's the best never ends up panning out for her, and it leads to her undoing. I honestly think Roxy's character was handled much better than either Chica or Monty. Whereas Chica and Monty remain pretty much the same throughout the entire game, Roxy goes on a bit of a character arc as the night progresses, which makes her unique among the Glamrocks and my absolute favorite. However, there's one Glamrock even more unique than her. Glamrock Freddy really broke the mold in this game, being the first friendly animatronic in the entire series, unless you count Baby or Helpy. I don't count Baby because, well, she wasn't actually friendly, and I don't count Helpy because we don't really know what he actually is. I think he's a toy. Regardless, Glamrock Freddy assists Gregory through pretty much the whole game, up until the game's many bitter ends. Freddy can best be described as a combination of a dad and a dog. He's cautious and careful with Gregory, and helps him out with every ounce of strength he has, but he's also a little slow, and Gregory often beats him on the uptake. For this reason, I think the word I'd best use to describe Freddy is companion. He's the ultimate best friend. He can help Gregory out, but friendship is a two-way street. Whenever Freddy starts to power down or must be prepared, it's up to Gregory to help him out, which I think further solidifies the bond these two grow as the game continues. It's very odd, but this game honestly has a really great found family narrative that I'll describe once I talk about this game's endings. But don't hold your breath. I'm going to be talking about this game's endings when I talk about the ugly. For now, let's keep going, as there's 4 distinct animatronic characters who I would not use the word Glamrock to describe. Those 4 are the Daycare Attendant, Mini Music Man, DJ Music Man, and Burn Trap. I'll have to briefly brush through these 4 as they, in general, have much less screen time than the Glamrocks. The Daycare Attendant is another one of my favorite characters, being the duo of Sun and Moon, sharing one body. They inhabit, of course, the daycare. Whereas Sun is a completely friendly face and general nice guy, there's one rule surrounding the daycare, and that's that the light must be kept on. In the dark, Moon emerges, and this guy... well, I made an entire video about it. Maybe check that out. Essentially, Moon is the opposite of Sun, being an absolute monster and a villain. The Daycare Attendant is the enemy of probably Security Breach's best gameplay segment, so if you decide to play after watching, look forward to this guy. Mini Music Man is a tiny version of the Music Man seen in FNAF 6, who seems to be a wind-up toy that was stolen at some point and let loose through the ventilation. It's never revealed who stole Music Man or why, but it's most likely Vanny setting it loose throughout the Pizzaplex. Mini Music Man is a fine enough enemy given he only appears in certain vent chases, but he's a fun addition that adds a horror element to the vent crawls that they previously didn't have. DJ Music Man, on the other hand, is this giant insectoid DJ who crawls through the various tube openings of the arcade. He's contempt after a power reset, but he's a dangerous enemy until then. Steer clear of him. He's also host of probably the second best part of Security Breach, so that's also a plus. And that leaves us with Burn Trap, the semi-return of Semi-William Afton. Not much is known about this guy just yet, but he serves as the true final boss of the game, attempting to corrupt Glamrock Freddy and using the already corrupted Glamrocks to try and kill you. He ends up being taken out by the Blob, who I have not talked about because I don't really consider the Blob much of a character. Encyclopedia be damned. Alright, fine, but be warned, I have like 1 or 2 sentences about the Blob because compared to the little we know about Burn Trap and Vanny, we know nothing about the Blob. The Blob is a mass of wires and animatronic parts you can find before the Burn Trap boss fight, who ends up dragging Burn Trap away at the end of it. It's pretty much unknown what the Blob is or where it came from. Still, even with that weird hangnail at the end, this is one of the best character rosters out of any FNAF game, with plenty of characters I would call top quality. Roxy, Freddy, and the Daycare Attendant especially stand out to me as 3 of the best animatronics in the whole series, based on their designs, personalities, and roles in gameplay. And all 3 are backed up by amazing voice performances. I have to admit, the voice acting in this game is by and large the best in the series. All your favorite voice actors return, with the sad exception of PJ Haywood as William Afton. However, we're once again seeing Kellen Goff, this time as Freddy and the Daycare Attendant, and Heather Masters voicing Vanessa and Chica. Cameron Miller brings a very strong performance as Montgomery Gator, or he would if Monty had like more than 4 lines, and Andy Field returns as Hand Unit, or rather Dread Unit, the voice you can hear throughout the Pizzaplex, basically the building's narrator. But probably the most important voice in this game is the newcomer, Marta Svetek, who voices Gregory, Vanny, and Roxy. I love this performance across all 3 characters, so much so I even bought her autograph. Yes, it's framed, yes, it's made out to my name. Some might argue that Gregory's voice sounds a little too effeminate, but that honestly doesn't matter to me. I mean, growing up I watched Pokemon, which kinda had the same deal going, and I'm sure any Dragon Ball fan would tell you it doesn't matter. Regardless of how you feel about Gregory's voice, Vanny and Roxy are both done so perfectly. Vanny emulates a lot of the same conniving, evil energy that Afton had in previous games, and Roxy has the perfect voice for her more brash side. It's a really solid casting, but what good is a cast of characters without a good set? I have to admit, I love the Pizzaplex from every nook and cranny to the large open atrium that seems consistently daunting in its size. An open world FNAF game was pretty much always what fans wanted, especially after FNAF 2, but I pretty much always thought that that probably wouldn't work given these buildings aren't meant to be large, sprawling video game maps. But the Mega Pizzaplex's scale works for the game, and works amazingly well. This whole map feels perfect to just run around in, explore, and find clues and more mysteries. It's open enough that you feel rewarded for exploration, but just small enough that you'll pretty much always be going the right way. Eventually, like any real building, you'll get a feel for what's what and where's where, to a point where you don't ever need to check your Fazwatch. And trust me, we'll get to that thing. I also really like that this game in some ways emulates many of the older FNAF games through these short, office-based challenges. Some are based on the gameplay of FNAF 1, others feel more based on FNAF 6 than anything else, or sometimes they're serving Chica a pizza. In any case, these office challenges vary by difficulty, and by, well, fun. Although I consider the idea on its own to be great, so that's why it's here, in the good section. These office challenges make for gameplay shakeups that range in difficulty and variety, and for the most part feel incredibly unique. There's a slight issue in defining what an office challenge is, since not every security card you receive will be part of an office challenge, but for the most part, these are your how long can you survive kind of deals. Outside of the office challenges, I really appreciate the amount of detail that went into the general look of the Pizzaplex. Everything here feels like it was crafted with love and care. There's unique art everywhere, and each major set piece feels like it belongs. Maybe it's because my standards have been drastically lowered by games like Garten of Banban or Hello Neighbor, but these places feel genuine. They feel like they've been here for a while and they've been used. There's no extra coat of shine on these things to make them any more brand new than they ought to be. Plus, the variety of sets is something to really be appreciated. Between the sewers, Gator Golf, the underground pizza place, the daycare, Rockstar Row, I have a hard time placing which I find myself most interested in. Each one carries a different tone and atmosphere that can make a moment in gameplay feel eerie, intriguing, relaxing, or downright horrifying. And horrifying is not really something this game does very often, so keep that in mind. And that pretty much explains what made me fall in love with this game. Sure, it might be relatively surface level, but this being my reintroduction to the FNAF series, well, it hooked me back in perfectly. I was able to play this game and have a good time with it. Surface level does not always mean simple or stupid, it just means what's on the outside. This game's presentation is immaculate, and one of my favorite elements about it. But unfortunately, now it's time to talk about the things I like a little bit less. Whew, so let's get this one out of the way. The glitches. FNAF Security Breach is probably most infamous for its borderline unplayable launch, being coated head to toe in bugs and glitches that pulled people out of the story in-game lightning quick. While I personally have never had a very glitch-heavy run of Security Breach, I'll admit to a couple soft locks over the multiple playthroughs I've had of the game. It's never fun to be soft lock in a game like this, especially when save points are spread apart from one another rather than being integrated into a main menu of some kind. Oh, and that main menu? Kind of a joke. Most of your in-game information is located on your Fazwatch, including your flashlight battery, any in-game notes you collect, and your camera system. So why then is your inventory located in the main menu? The main menu pauses everything going on in the game while the Fazwatch doesn't. It's reserved for more technical options, including sound, subtitles, exiting the game, things like that. So why on earth is this also where you check the in-game items you've collected? That's a small pet peeve, but it's one that has literally always bugged me. Not that the Fazwatch is any good anyway. This Fazwatch is where you'll be doing most of your dirty work that doesn't involve you running past furries. It's where you access your map, your quests, and your notes. First off, the map screen is totally useless. It doesn't provide you with a useful legend, and is generally unable to be manipulated. Like I said before, you're probably going to remember the layout of the building anyway, so this isn't much of a problem, but it's the camera system that's just totally useless. So you know how FNAF cameras pretty much since the first game have always been pretty unnecessary? In the first game, there's only really 2 cameras you have to check on, those being Foxy in Pirate's Cove, and Freddy when he's in the East Hall corner. In FNAF 2, you only ever have to check the puppet's box to keep it wound up. Sure, in FNAF 3 the cameras are more useful than not, but that's literally because they're your only defense. Sister Location, you don't need them except for Custom Night, and then in UCN it's less about what's on the cameras and more about what tasks you need to do on the cameras, switching the music box and all that. But I think Security Breach takes the cake for the most useless camera system in the series. Not once do you ever need to check on these cameras. I do use them sometimes, primarily because I like planning ahead, but they're never required and are generally really bad to look at. They don't actually look like cameras at all. The only effect used to make them seem even a little bit like a camera is this static wave filter, and everything moves at like 5 frames a second or less. It's really just pathetic. The camera system more than anything just feels tacked on, like they felt like they needed to somehow include one without actually putting in the effort to make that the case. Even then, FNAF doesn't need the cameras to function. Both FNAF 4 and FNAF 6 prove that well enough. Hell, you could argue that most of Sister Location proves that too. Another thing that I and many others before me will rag on about nonstop, the game's not scary. Maybe it's because I grew up and what frightened me when I was 11 no longer frightens me now, but I'm gonna blame the game instead for not scaring me anymore. Jokes aside, there's very little to this game I think anyone could call scary. It has bits and pieces here and there. The sewers level, especially the maze with Shattered Chica, comes to mind, but this game is just too damn brightly lit. The big aesthetic problem with this game is that even though these environments are beautiful and feel lived in, they don't feel like they're closed down for the night. All the lights are on, this place is swarming with as many staff bots at night as I imagine customers during the day. It really feels like Steel Wolf forgot the genre of game they were making and just tried to make it as flashy as possible. Flashy is good and all that, but it comes at a detrimental cost that I imagine many others just don't like. It's kind of funny putting Security Breach footage side by side with basically any of the other games, because it just seems like it's not even from the same series. This game is all about having its own identity, but at the cost of relationship with the rest of the series. Also, this game takes place over the course of 1 night, not 5, so points off for that. Since the beginning of the script, I knew I wanted to keep things mostly positive, but that's kinda hard to do when 2/3 of the idea are generally negative. So in hoping to at least change ugly from being a bad thing to more of a neutral thing, I'll be defining ugly in this sense as being pretty much anything that feels wrong, but doesn't subtract from general gameplay. Essentially, things that could use improvements, half-baked ideas. I'll also be using this section to talk about its story and lore implications, because honestly, there's no better way to describe this game's story than ugly. In fact, let's start with story. As I mentioned earlier, I really like Freddy and Gregory's growing bond throughout the game, and that would appear to be the main storyline you follow at first. Pretty much every scene has these 2 characters riffing off one another in ways that just feel natural. But it's pretty much every other element of the story I either don't like or I outright hate. For example, Vanny. I personally love Vanny in terms of design and concept, but the execution leaves so much to be desired. Despite being marketed as the main villain of the game, Vanny never really makes any appearances during the game outside of the rare chase sequence here or there, and she's totally fine if her only role in the game is chasing you with scripted points, but they're so spaced out from one another that every appearance she has feels like her first. Suffice it to say, she does not radiate that villainous aura that Steel Wolf clearly wanted her to radiate. That's not to say she's a bad character at all, she's an excellent character. She just happens to be very poorly utilized in this game. It would be like if you're playing a Resident Evil game and Nemesis was there, but he only ever appeared like 3 times in the story and was totally optional as a final boss. Speaking of final bosses, Burntrap. Well, here's the thing. I really like Burntrap. Yeah, I'm not afraid to say it, I love this crispy chicken tender looking furry. He's an absolute menace, and given what he's done in the Tales from the Pizza Box stories, I'd wager Burntrap is easily the most brutal incarnation of Afton yet. I love the more brooding, animalistic vibe this version of the character has. Springtrap and Scraptrap both feel like you can reasonably believe there's an intelligent guy in there, but Burntrap is literally just a monster, and I love it for that. That said, I'm probably in the minority here, as most people really did not like Afton returning, especially since Vanny was clearly being brushed to the side in favor of Burntrap. Although, luckily, Burntrap is not actually Afton, he's the Mimic, but, you know, you should totally watch my video on that. But probably the ugliest parts of the story are the endings. Some of them are clearly jokes, others are clearly important, The VIP ending literally makes you say, what the fuck? But none of these are necessarily good. At least, not on the level of some previous FNAF games. It's like the developers saw that fans really liked FNAF 3 and FNAF 6's endings, so they thought the solution was to just burn the building to the ground and make that the ending. In fact, the Pizzaplex is burnt down in multiple endings. It's kind of funny that they tried that angle a few times. But of course, the biggest problem with these endings is that they feel like an afterthought. Only one of them is animated, that being Burntrap's ending. The rest are basically PowerPoint presentations told in this comic book style format. See, I like this comic style, but it would work better to introduce the story, not close it. If we maybe saw Gregory sneak into the Pizzaplex in this style rather than see him out, then maybe they would have been more tolerable. But pretty much everyone agrees these endings are nothing more than laughable in most cases, and straight up disappointing in others. Not criticizing the art here, by the way, the art itself looks good, but having it at the end of the game where much of the visual work was done by former Pixar animators makes it feel really shallow. But that's something endemic of the entire game. Everything feels like it's missing something, and in most cases, that's because it is. Simply diving into the game's files, you can find entire areas of the Pizzaplex that were scrapped, hidden away arcade cabinets, and even game modes that never saw the light of day. It shouldn't be controversial to say it at this point, but Security Breach was clearly released in an unfinished state. I'm hoping that with the release of Ruin, which should be sometime this year, some of this content makes a comeback, but I'm not holding my breath. It really seems like this game was rushed out the gate too quickly. Although Steel Wool has made it clear they're taking their time with this DLC, the damage has pretty much been done in regards to the base game. Some people have said in the past that they want Scott to go back to making the games himself, but I think that time is long behind us now. So instead, let's finish off this video with a positive note. Despite its many flaws, I still love Security Breach. This game proved to me that there are fans of the FNAF series who aren't just willing to keep going through thick and thin, but that there's an entire team of fans who's working on development. At the end of the day, regardless of the actual quality of this game, one thing it undeniably captures as perfectly as the very first game in the series is the heart and soul. The original Five Nights at Freddy's felt like a passion project made by one dedicated man, and this game feels much the same, only this time with a studio to make it as big as it could have been. That's probably what sticks with me the most after playing this game. Regardless of its graphical style, its storytelling, its gameplay, or its horror, this game feels like the very first FNAF game I ever played, and that is 100% because it was made by people with an undeniable love for what they were doing. It's a special game to me, and I imagine many others because at the end of the day, it's flawed to hell and back, but those flaws hardly impact the actual experience of playing the game. I guess what I'm saying is that Security Breach is good, it's bad, and it's ugly. But I don't give a damn. I love it regardless. I'm DMuted. If you like this video, be sure to like and subscribe down below. Peace.